important details follow. The following message is transmitted at the request of the United States government. An invasion of this country has been launched by the People's Republic of China. It is reported that Chinese paratroopers jumped out of commercial airliners near Detroit. They began firing on the city and taking hostages left and right, including the mayor of Detroit. It is reported that the city has fallen into Chinese hands. NORAD has detected that a second wave of the Chinese invasion is inbound and is expected to arrive soon. This wave appears stronger and is also carrying rocket launchers.
I had dozed off on night watch and was woken by the first emergency broadcast that had been transmitted in weeks. I had heard from the government contract workers that there were half a dozen other hostile countries besides Russia invading our country while we were at our weakest. I radioed Joe, who was manning watch on his street, and relayed the information about the Chinese taking control of Detroit and a second wave approaching on commercial airliners. The small bit of hope I had, hours earlier, was now once again diminishing quickly. I was exhausted, both physically and mentally. How much longer could we maintain base here, at home with Russian forces on the ground, now just 10 short miles away? We now had Chinese paratroopers aiding their ally, a group of thugs blocks away killing and raping families and women. It was all too much to take in. I just wanted sleep, but couldn't chance abandoning post right now and it costing me my family's safety. I patrolled the front yard and Bear patrolled the backyard. Alicia was adjusting as good as could be expected after losing her family in such a horrible and devastating manner. I told Joe at sunrise I was going to crash and for him to meet me at 1000 hours. We had plans to finish a neighborhood sweep and to take the fight to the 7 Marauders if we ran across them. Alicia said only 2 or 3 were armed with firearms, the rest with knives and baseball bats. I heard Bear barking in the backyard. I went to investigate. He had cornered a rabbit and was pouncing. At least he was getting some much-deserved meat, unlike the rest of us. The local high school, where the soldiers had set up base, was approximately 0.98 miles away. How would I know that? My eldest daughter went to school there. I had to drive her every day. The district had a rule. If you live within 1 mile, you didn't get bus transportation. It was nice knowing we had medical help so close. Since Lucille passed, we had no one with any kind of nursing skills. By 5 a.m., my wife was already awake. Her and the kids would often be sleeping by 8 p.m. at night. She started each morning the same, boiling water on the grill for her morning coffee. She was never an animal person, but was warming quickly to having Bear around. He was great company and even better protection. She asked if I wanted any breakfast before a 4 to 5 hour nap. I told her no. I was too tired to eat. My eyes had black around them from the exhaustion of this new world. She was worried I'd overdo it, end up falling into bad health. I promised her I was okay, just needed a few hours of rest before Joe came over. I went upstairs and was asleep before my head hit the pillow. Hours later, I awoke to a figure standing over me, watching me. It was Joe. He said, "Good morning, sunshine. Time to rise and shine." "Morning, Joe," I replied. He said, "It's 10:05 and you're late." It was the ex-Army and him talking. I geared up, bypassing the morning wash from the pool water. Joe had body armor on and was armed with his AR-15 and a sidearm. I didn't have any body armor, just my camo chest rig, loaded up with 6 30-round magazines and the 2 grenades. My wife was even more uneasy for me to leave than any time before. I promised her I'd be fine. I had Joe, who was ex-Army. He'd done this multiple times during his multiple tours in Afghanistan. I'd follow his lead. He'd been there, done this clearing houses on search and terminate missions overseas. I kissed the family goodbye. Once again, promised Alicia if we ran across a group of assholes, revenge would be enforced. I suggested to Joe we head east, work his street, and make our way towards Alicia's house, where the group was last seen days ago. He agreed, and by 10:20 we set off. We passed the charred remains of the first group of marauders and the Russian pilot I'd encountered in the middle of the street. We quickly turned left and headed down Joe Street. We were now into the second week of August, and thankfully it had brought a break from the oppressive heat we'd experienced all summer. Since the day the EMP had hit, Joe had rode it out inside his house. He hadn't needed to go out for supplies, so this was his first time sweeping the neighborhood. I'd already cleared 2 houses by myself, Bear's house and the house next to Joe's where I scored the Senecas. That left approximately 13 more houses to clear. Water and food were always a priority, but my biggest hope was for some transportation. I'd feel a lot better about bugging out if we weren't on foot. We approached the first house directly next to Joe's. He said he hadn't seen anyone come and go in the 3+ weeks since Armageddon started. The house was fully intact. No signs of looting. Joe knocked on the front door while I covered the back. No answer. Joe knocked again. Again, no answer. We decided to enter. Crowbar in my hand, I popped the front door and was hit by the smell of death. There in the living room was the expired, decomposing body of an older man in a recliner. No obvious signs of foul play or suicide. There was a newspaper in his lap dated July 19th. My guess was he had a pacemaker that ceased to work the moment the EMP detonated. Hiding behind the chair was a cat that looked like they'd been gnawing on his owner's remains as his only source of food. Just an absolutely horrifying image. It was a ranch house with just the 1 floor and basement. Joe cleared the remaining rooms as I checked the basement. The odor of a 3-week-old kitty litter box hit me in the face as I opened the door to go downstairs. To my amazement, he had a food pantry down there. Sauces, pasta, canned fruit and vegetables, 5 cases of water stocked up. Joe hollered down the upstairs was all clear. I told him what I found down here, a decent-sized score. I offered to split it with him, but he insisted I take it. He said I had 4 other mouths to feed, plus a dog. I couldn't argue with that. We hauled the goods upstairs, and for the time being, took them next door and left them at Joe's house. One last place to check, the garage. We opened the door, and my jaw just about hit the ground. There sat an old Ford Bronco, along with a Cadillac DeVille. I ran over and read the registration sticker. 1964 Ford Bronco. Joe had already retrieved the keys that hung in the kitchen. He tossed them over and I fumbled through them, trying to find the correct one. The Bronco was in pristine condition. I opened the driver's side door, put the key in the ignition, crossed my fingers and turned it. She was trying to turn over. I gave her a little gas and it roared to life. The odometer had 42,000 miles and the gas tank was full. We now had a set of wheels, 4x4 by the way. I couldn't contain my excitement, laying on the horn. Joe told me to knock it off and keep things quiet. Water, food, and wheels. The day couldn't get any better. Joe reminded me to focus. The day was still young. We ended up loading all the supplies into the back of the Bronco and decided to move the vehicle into Joe's garage, taking no chances leaving it behind. We moved the cars that Joe had blocking and barricading his house. We now had a bug-out vehicle secured. We set back out with a dozen houses still remaining to sweep, 5 on the east side and 7 on the west side of the street. The next 3 houses were uneventful, all empty, not much in the way of supplies. I couldn't complain, even if we didn't come across a single pack of Raymond the rest of the day. This was already an incredible success. We approached the next house, and Joe heard movement inside. He went stealth, and now was communicating in hand signals to me. He motioned me to go cover the back, while he covered the front. We entered at the same time, and found a family of 4 inside, shocked to see 2 men armed with rifles busting in. They pleaded with us not to harm them. Joe, taking no chances, commanded each to the floor on their knees with their arms in the air. It was a man, woman, and 2 children. The man said he was sorry for what he did. Joe asked him sorry about what. He said he had to do it. We told them, "We're not here to harm you. We're sweeping the neighborhood for supplies, friendlies, and enemies." The man said they encountered a group of men the next neighborhood over to the east. I told Joe that's Alicia's neighborhood. That's got to be them. The father told us they'd been riding things out in their house since the grid went down. He went outside to use a bathroom when he noticed a group looting houses, spray painting them with the words, "Marauders not far." After they emptied each one, and if it was occupied, they killed who was ever inside. The man was spotted by the group. They began approaching him. He said one of them got hung up on the chain-link fence that ran the perimeter of his backyard. With no firearm to protect himself and his family, he grabbed the bat that the guy dropped when he got hung up and teed off on his head as he hung upside down. They then evacuated and found refuge in this empty house. He said this all just happened just 10 short minutes ago. Joe asked them if they were seen entering this house. The man answered he didn't know. Adrenaline was taking over. I was ready to charge out and seek revenge for Alicia's family. A voice then called out, "First we're going to burn you out. Then we're all going to have our way with your lady as we make you and the kids watch. Then we'll kill her. Then we'll kill the kids. And finally, we'll cave your head in like you did to our man Simon." I looked at Joe. He looked back at me. It was now go time. That's when the first Molotov cocktail exploded onto the roof of the house. They were burning us out. There we stood, Joe and I, and the family of 4, with the roof now burning. The 2 young children were hysterical with fear. Their mom and dad were not faring much better. I ran to the kitchen window to try and get a head count on what we were facing. The only thing separating us from them was a sliding glass door. I peeked out, counted at least 6. We didn't have a numbers advantage, but the group had no idea that the family of 4 was not alone inside. Joe told the family to go hide in the first floor bathroom. I saw a silhouette coming around the front of the house to the front door. Seconds later, he kicked open the door and was met with multiple rounds of American Eagle 5.56. Joe covered the back. I yelled to him, "One down at the front door." The Marauders now knew this wouldn't be a walk in the park. Joe started firing on the group in the backyard through the kitchen window. That's when a metal lawn chair crashed shattered the sliding glass door. It was quickly followed with a second Molotov cocktail that ignited onto the dining room table. Joe was able to drop the thug who threw it. 2 down now, but there was now heavy smoke and fire on the first floor, on top of the roof being fully engulfed. We needed to get out, and we needed to go fast, but Joe and I both knew that's what they wanted and would be waiting for us. We had 2 choices: succumb to smoke inhalation or evacuate through one of the 3 exits. The front door, the busted out sliding glass door, or head to the garage. Joe yelled to the family that was hiding out in the bathroom that it was time to go. The 6 of us headed for the garage. I opened the door to the garage while Joe was in the position, and thankfully so. Already in the garage was 2 thugs that Joe dispatched without blinking. 3 down. 4 down now. One was armed with a shotgun that I told the father to grab. There we stood, in a shootout to death, and I didn't even know his name. I asked, "What's your name, guy?" Surprised by my question, he replied back, "Sean. That's my wife, Ruth, and kids Casey and Lily." I calmly told them, "Sean and Ruth, we're going to get the 4 of you out of here alive." There were no windows on the garage doors, no telling what stood on the other side. There was a back door that led to the backyard, but it was too dangerous to get close enough to take a look. We heard a voice yell out, "We know you're trapped in there, and you've got to come out sometime, and we'll be waiting." It wouldn't be long before the roof gave way, and the fire in the dining room spread towards the kitchen. Both children were crying frantically. They looked to be no older than 7 or 8. I couldn't help but think of my own kids as I looked at them. I wasn't going to let them die. That's when the gunshots, 12-gauge sluggers to be exact, started peppering the aluminum garage doors, shredding holes in it like paper. I reached up, pulled the release on the garage door opener. Joe said, "What the hell are you doing?" I pulled out one of the grenades and said, "I'm going bowling." I told Sean, "Cover the back door while Joe cracks open the garage door, and I'm rolling out a surprise for these bastards." As soon as it explodes, we make our way out the back door. On 3, Joe. 1, 2, 3. Joe opened the door while standing to the side, carefully avoiding incoming rounds. I pulled the pin, rolled that son of a bitch under and out, and 5 seconds later, the entire garage rattled as the explosion echoed down the street. Joe said, "Let's go." He led us out the back door. I had no idea what we'd encounter, but we would immediately find out. Joe told us to stay in a tight line formation as we exited out the back. We knew at least 4 had met their maker, and hopefully the grenade explosion took out the rest. We exited and headed left to make our way around front, Joe leading, followed by Sean and his family, then me covering the rear. Immediate gunfire came from the other side of the deck. Joe was hit. He dropped to the ground. I returned fire and was able to terminate another threat. 5 down for sure. I told Sean, "Cover us," while I checked on Joe. Fortunately, the round struck him directly on his chest plate. He was stunned and dazed, but was going to be okay. I told Joe, "Don't scare me like that, man." My wife had radioed. She had heard the explosion and the chaos. She was worried. I told her, "Can't talk, but okay for now." I pulled Joe to his feet. I told him I was going to go get around front and see what's left out there. I carefully made my way around the garage, staying low and close to the siding of the house. I peeked around front, seeing 2 more bodies, neither fully intact, on the driveway. Number 6 and 7 down. To my amazement, there was one still alive, crawling away on the ground. His right leg was missing from the knee down. I motioned for my group to come forward. I asked the wounded thug where he was crawling off to. He responded, "Eat shit." I said, "How about I finish you off, cut you up, throw you on the grill, and I'll eat you, asshole. He said, you wouldn't dare. I said, I've already done it before. He was now shaking in fear at my cannibalism threat. I asked how many more were in your group. He said dozens. I hoped he was bullshitting me, but I needed to know the truth. I had hoped this was the end of our domestic threat. I told Sean to take his wife and kids around to the back of the house. They didn't need to see what was coming. The Marauder said, more are going to come. Eventually, your luck's going to run out. I said, well, today, your luck runs out. This is for Alicia and her family. I raised my foot up into the air and began stomping his head in with my Rocky Gear tactical boots. I looked over at Joe and said, never waste a bullet, right? This is personal, and I'm going to make him suffer. I smiled and said, 8 down, as I wiped the brains and blood off my boots in the now foot-high grass. Sean could not thank Joe and I enough for protecting them and guaranteeing they'd see their children another day. Joe told him, don't thank us just yet. There's more of them out there, and worse yet, there's Russian boots on the ground just 10 miles away, due south. We shared all the intel we received via the military contract workers and what I'd gathered from the ham radio. Ruth was intrigued about the camp at the local high school. I told them, I'm not going to tell you what to do. You have to think about your kids first. There are multiple vacant houses near me that you could take up residence at. We have extra food, extra water. I asked Joe how he was doing after absorbing a round to the chest plate. He said he'd be a little sore. 2 tours in Afghanistan, and he'd never been shot. He said what we're facing and dealing with here is far worse in Afghanistan. Domestic and foreign enemies, no power and no allies besides each other. Sean and Ruth decided to seek harbor at the high school. I told Sean how we were instructed to show up unarmed. He handed me the shotgun. I said, no, keep it. He said, what do you mean? I told him, keep it. Ditch it and hide it before you get there. There's no telling what you'll encounter on the way. If you decide to come back, grab it and protect your family. Part of me wanted to escort them, but I had my own family that needed me at home. Joe was in no condition to make the trip. I thought about driving them there in the Bronco, but truth is, I didn't want to risk the vehicle unless we were bugging out. I handed him my walkie, told him we're on channel 22. If you run into anything, let us know. You've got about 2 hours till darkness. Either way, stay in radio contact. The school's less than a mile away. I told them, we have some water back at Joe's. Let's get him home, stock you guys up before you set off. We handed them each some water bottles we'd scored from the house next to Joe's and gave Sean some additional ammo too. We wished Sean, Ruth, Casey, and Lily our best. Joe headed in. I told him I'd contact him later, as we'd both monitor Sean on channel 22. I was thankful again to see my house as I rounded the corner. I entered through the gate, as I normally did, into the garage. And before I got both feet in, my 8-year-old daughter was standing there and said, Dad, we have a big problem. I asked my daughter, what's the problem? Is your mom and sister okay? What is it? She said, it's the bathrooms, Dad. The toilets are filling up. After what Joe and I had just endured the past few hours, I didn't think the day could get any worse. Boy, was I wrong. I stepped into the house and could smell the downstairs bathroom from 10 feet away. When the power went out, we'd resorted to garbage bags inside a 5-gallon bucket. I dug a landfill pit in the backyard and would dispose of the bags and our garbage there. I didn't want wandering eyes to see our empty food cans and bags we'd been eating. When the sewage pumps stopped functioning, I knew it would only be a matter of time before the sewage began to back up. The people who continued using their toilets and dumping water in to flush it had now helped to cause it back up into our houses. Marauders, foreign invaders, no power, and now literal shit flowing back up. It was now beginning to be all too much to handle. I explained to my wife, kids, and Alicia what Joe and I had encountered today. Since the start of the EMP, I'd always been honest with them, and I wasn't going to change that now. I told them, there's more of those bastards out there who attacked Alicia's family. We disposed of 8 today, saved a family of 4, and Joe was shot but survived, thanks to his body armor. My wife asked where the family is. She hadn't seen or communicated with anyone in the past 17 days since we lost Lucille, Jack, and Eddie. I told her I offered them one of the vacant houses and supplies, but they regretfully declined and were now en route to the high school. I told her I gave them a walkie and Joe and I would be monitoring their progress. She asked me with tears in her eyes, how much longer can we stay here? Deep down, I knew she was right. Eventually, our luck would run out. I told her we'll discuss it over dinner, which happened to be lentil soup warmed up on the Coleman cooktop. While she tended to dinner, I walked out back and was met by Bear. He was always happy to see me come back home. Tongue licking, tail wagging, rubbing his head on my leg asking for attention. I grabbed some soap and shampoo we kept next to the bucket and began to clean myself up with the pool water. I could wash the dirt, grime, and blood off, but the horrific images and encounters would remain with me for as long as I survived this. My wife brought out some clean clothes, and I dried off. I spent a few minutes throwing a football that Bear would fetch that was now semi-flat from the puncture holes from his teeth. It was his favorite game to play. I'd chase after him like a linebacker did a running back. My wife called out, dinner's ready. Lentil soup, pickles, lemonade, and Rice Krispie treats for dessert. It wasn't a 5-star meal, but we were thankful for it. 27 days in, and we weren't starving or dehydrated. We were the fortunate ones. I knew there were millions upon millions who wished they were still alive and enjoying a meal with their loved ones. She asked, what are we going to do? I said I could remove the toilets, stuff some clothes down the pipes, and cover it up with cinder blocks from the backyard. She said, no, I'm not talking about that. How long are we going to stay here? We have a vehicle now, an opportunity to leave, to go someplace safer. The thought of setting out on the road scared me. We had no idea what we'd run into. More marauders, foreign soldiers, impassable roads, but she was right. We knew what we'd be encountering here. The boots were coming, and Joe and I would be no match for hundreds of soldiers. That's when the walkie went off. It was Sean. He said they'd made it to the nursing home en route to the high school. He just said it smelled like death. Windows smashed out, most likely by looters looking to score painkillers and other drugs. Bodies littering the parking lot, being picked apart by crows. The gas station I had visited on day 1 was a pile of rubble, burnt to the ground. Vehicles abandoned on the road with doors left open where people had scavenged, hoping to score supplies. He said the scene was more reminiscent of a third world country than it was the United States. He said a Humvee was approaching. I told him to get out of there and hide. The next sound I heard was gunfire, with screams from his wife Ruth. After that, it was silence. I couldn't believe what I just heard. Neither could my family. Was it American soldiers shooting and executing their own people? Or could it be Russians? A voice then came suddenly over the walkie. Hello, comrade. Where are you? Judging by this cheap communication device, you must be close. I see you like to run on channel 22, and soon you'll be running for your life. I immediately turned off the walkie. It was Russian soldiers that were less than a half mile from our house. Bear began barking. He only did that if someone was outside. I told everyone down to the basement. Told my wife, if anyone comes down through the door, you shoot first, ask questions later. She said, what are you doing? I said, Bear and I are going to go see who it was. I appreciated Bear's warning, but it was also a double-edged sword. Whoever was out there could hear him, and any dog barking from inside a house a month in obviously had a human caring for him. I grabbed my rifle that never left my side as dusk was setting in. That's when a voice called out from behind the front door. It's me, Joe. Open up. I said, Jesus, Joe. You scared the shit out of us. He had heard Sean's last call and what had happened. He didn't want to risk radio communications with the enemy now listening. He said he'd seen a drone up in the air about a quarter mile away on his way over. I yelled down to the wife and kids it was okay to come up. At this point, the four of them had had enough. I told Joe we needed to evacuate. I assumed the high school was overrun by Russians. I have a wife, 2 daughters, and Alicia to think about. It was no longer safe here. Joe agreed and said, you do need to leave. I said, what about you? He said he took an oath for this country, and he'll die defending it. I said, Joe, you don't need to do that now. He replied, I do, and I will. And if my wife is still alive, she'll come back home looking for me. I'm not leaving, but you are, and you're taking the Bronco. He said, you don't have time to waste. Start gathering your supplies. I said, Carmen, who lived 2 doors down, ran his own landscaping business and has a trailer along the side of his house. The perfect thing to hook up to the hitch of the Bronco and load up with supplies. Joe and I would wait for darkness to set in and bring the Bronco along with the trailer back to my house. I told my wife and kids to empty all the storage containers that housed Christmas decorations, toys, and knickknacks. Start filling them with all our supplies and food from the basement. The Bronco had a full tank of gas, and I had 3 5-gallon containers in the garage as well. Joe asked where we would go. I said I had the perfect place, 65 miles to the southwest, a place I knew very well. Wood Creek Campsite. I spent every summer there in my youth with my grandmother, and after she passed, my mother spent the last 3+ years of her life there too. There was an abundance of campers, 4 cabins, and a huge creek of fresh water that ran through it. I knew many of the seasonal campers there and expected to be welcomed. I knew the Russians had a large force south of me, and that was the direction I had to travel. I had a few maps in my state and would map out multiple routes in case I ran into resistance. I'd also pay particular attention to any and all bridges along the way. I fully expected roadblocks at each of these. At this point, I was ignoring the martial law and curfew warnings. Joe and I set off to grab the Bronco from the house and pick up the trailer on the way back. Darkness had now set in. Earlier tonight was the first time either of us had seen drones in the sky. No idea who had deployed them, but I was guessing they were Russian. On the walk to Joe's, I asked again if he was sure about his decision to stick it out. He reiterated he was at peace with it. He still held out hope his wife would somehow return back to New York. The extra supplies we grabbed from the same house as a Bronco were still inside of it. Joe told me to take them without hesitation. He said he would help load everything up tonight and provide watch for us. I couldn't thank Joe enough. I jumped in the driver's seat, Joe in the passenger seat, and set off to retrieve the trailer, maneuvering around cars left for dead in the street. Backed into the house two doors down from mine, hooked up the landscaping trailer to the Bronco. It was going to be another night of no sleep. I decided we'd leave at sunrise. I liked our chances better being able to see what sat around each turn, each bend in the road. That gave us roughly 8 hours to gear up, stock up, and prepare to bug out. The trailer was secured inside the garage. The Bronco in the driveway with Joe standing watch. My wife, myself, and the kids work relentlessly, filling every storage bin, backpack, cooler, and box with all the supplies from the basement. All the food, water, medical, propane, and ammo. Once the basement was emptied, we gathered sleeping bags, blankets, clothes, Mr. Buddy heaters, the Coleman cooktop stove, solar panel chargers, ham radios, a set of walkies, and the 3 5-gallon containers of gas. The whole process had taken over 6 hours. We had about 2 hours to daylight. The trailer was full to capacity. The last few items I added were some tools, shovels, rakes, and an axe. It was extremely difficult to leave our first home. We'd been here almost 10 years. It was the first house I'd ever owned. I covered everything in the trailer with a camo painted tarp. I pulled out the road maps and began highlighting multiple routes. I'd usually take the expressway when we ventured out to the campsite, but I knew that would be a parking lot of abandoned vehicles. With Russian forces due south, I decided we'd venture west before trying to maneuver back south. I walked out to try and convince Joe one last time to join us. He was still pulling night watch out in front of our house, allowing us all the time we needed to load up our gear. There was a peacefulness in the air tonight, a full moon, and a sky full of stars. I said, "What do you say, Joe? Any chance you change your mind? Come with us? Leave the chaos behind?" He said, "You know I can't. I'm hoping my wife finds her way back." I never told you this, but she was 5 months pregnant that day she stepped onto the plane. She'd be 6 months by now. It was supposed to be our first child. I said, "Well, you know where we're going to be. We'll be there hopefully by nightfall. I've got multiple routes ready to go in case we run into trouble." Joe helped me hook up the trailer to the hitch. My wife and kids said goodbye to Joe, thanked him for everything. I told him he's welcome to anything left behind here. The 5,000 gallons of pool water, bicycles, tools, whatever he needed, it was his now. Bear hopped up into the back seat with the kids, and Joe and I said our goodbyes. I told him, "Keep up the good fight, keep believing, and carry on, brother. I hope we cross paths again one day." Joe was an Army vet, the kind that didn't offer up too much emotion. But I could tell this moment was getting to him. I walked across the street to Eddie's final resting place, said my goodbyes to my neighbor and friend as well. Hopped into the vehicle, cranked the key over, and the 5 of us, plus Bear, set out for Wood Creek campsite. My wife and the kids were extremely uneasy about the trek we were embarking on. Truth was, I was too. I was now used to having Joe's cover, protection, and friendship. Even though my wife saved my life back on day 10, she wasn't battle-tested. I'd only had a few short hours of sleep in the past 2 days. Now more than ever, I needed to be alert and be ready. I told her, I've got 2 stops I needed to make on the way. She was surprised to hear me say that. She said, "I thought we were going straight there. Where do you plan on stopping?" I told her Dale and the kids from the group home had never left my mind. It was only a mile away, and we were headed that way anyway. I needed to know if they were still there, still alive. I also intended on driving to my father's house. I hadn't heard from him since 3 days before the EMP hit. That was now 31 days ago. As I drove down the street, we came upon the downed trees and the telephone pole where I had my first run-in with the Marauders back on day 4. The remains were still there, what was left of them anyway. This was the first images my wife and kids had seen since the world went to hell. Abandoned vehicles, houses burned to the foundation, dead bodies in the road. The sun was now rising to our east as we entered the neighborhood where the group home sat. The fire station, where I'd led Dale to water, was approaching on our right. As we got closer, I said, "No. Damn it, no. Don't let it be." There were 5 bodies laying out front. I told my wife, "Be ready for anything." I left the vehicle running and jumped out, rifle in hand. It was Dale and 4 of the boys. All 5 bodies were riddled with multiple bullet holes. The bodies were decomposed and had been there for weeks, it looked like. I was heartbroken at this sight. I had no time to spare. I wish I could have given them a proper burial. My wife and kids were in tears at the horror that sat next to us. I hopped back in, hands shaking on the steering wheel. We headed off to the next destination, my father's house. A normal route, and it was 12 miles from where we were standing. In 3 short days, it would be his 70th birthday. I only hoped he was still alive so we could celebrate it. We wouldn't be taking the normal route, though. I needed to stay off as many main roads as possible. My biggest concern was the location of his house. He lived 1 mile from the city's airport. An airport that I fully expected the Russians to now be occupying. I knew this wasn't a smart decision, but I needed to find out his fate. He would have done the same for me without hesitation. I headed south towards the next town over where he lived. The closer we got, the more horror we seen. Downed commuter flights all over the place. Plane after plane crashed into the ground. I couldn't imagine the hundreds, maybe thousands of planes across the country that fell from the sky at the same time that day. Tens of thousands of lives lost in an instant. We were lucky to be averaging 15 miles an hour as we maneuvered around vehicle after vehicle. What would normally be a 15-minute drive to his house would now take us well over an hour. I stuck to roads without bridges and without many bends, always fearful what would lie ahead. I'd normally take this road when I drive into our weekly meeting at work. Work, I thought. I couldn't believe it, but I missed it. Back when paying bills and working 50-plus hours a week was the norm. No matter what route I chose, we were eventually going to have to cross over a bridge that ran over the Erie Canal. And now was that moment. My wife, with binoculars in hand, said she didn't see anything ahead. I didn't know if I was more fearful of gunshots ringing out or someone deploying spike trips and flattening our wheels. We only had 1 spare tire in the back, 2 flats, and we'd be up Schitt's Creek. I thought about the fix-a-flat I left behind in my garage as we rushed out that morning. Damn it. It'd be a good thing to have right now. I slowly approached the bridge, and to my shock, coming down the side street to our right was 3 men running towards us, waving their hands, yelling for us to stop. My wife said, "What are you going to do?" I didn't hesitate. I floored it and accelerated over the bridge, not giving the men a second chance. I didn't know who they were. Civilians, marauders. For all I knew, they could have been co-workers of mine, holed up in our office for the past month. I didn't care. I wasn't taking the chance of finding out. We were now 5 miles out from my father's house. The 3 girls and Bear were now asleep in the back seat. We'd made it to the next town over. As I approached the now non-functioning signal light, we faced another hurdle. The intersection was blocked with broken down vehicles. It looked more like bumper cars. 8 cars I counted in the way, blocking both lanes. We were going to have to turn around, cross the bridge again, head down the side street, the same direction the men were running from. My wife asked, "Isn't there another way?" I said, "Not if we intend on making campsite by darkness." I carefully backed up, which was not an easy task to do with a trailer attached. I told my wife, "Have your rifle ready. I'm not stopping for anything," as we backtracked to the bridge. We'd cross and immediately make a left onto the road where my office was located. As we approached the bridge, the same group was still there. They heard the Bronco coming. I crossed over the canal, turned left, and the 3 of them stood right in the middle of the road. I told my wife, "Be ready to shoot." They didn't look to be armed with firearms. One had a tire iron, the other a hammer, the third had a pipe. They were 50 feet away, yelling for us to stop, and that word was not in my vocabulary today. I said, "If they don't move, you shoot them." She said, "Are you serious?" I just nodded my head. 20 feet away, and they had no intention of moving. I yelled, "Shoot!" waking the girls up in the back seat. The man in the middle threw the hammer directly into our windshield as I ran him over and kept moving. The windshield was now compromised with cracks. She never got a shot off. I said, "Don't ever make that mistake again. Next time, it could cost us our life." I passed my work office on our right, not even giving it a glance. I fully expected there would be dead bodies of friends and coworkers inside. The next intersection ahead also had vehicles piled up, but we were able to get just enough room to squeeze through. We'd already blown through a quarter tank of gas. I assume this old Bronco, loaded up with 5 people and a dog, towing a trailer filled to capacity, was getting about 7 miles to the gallon. As we made our way, now into another residential area, it was more of the same. Looted out houses, burned out houses, and the aroma of death in the air. Bobbing and weaving around vehicles, it then hit me. Check the radio, see if anything is broadcasting. Is there any news out there? I navigated the wheel as my wife turned the dial, checking both AM and FM bands. Nothing but static. No signs of life or hope. We were now less than a mile from my father's street. He lived in a condo association where the average age was close to 60. I was nervous with anticipation as to what I'd find. I slowly pulled in, and the first thing I noticed was the overgrown grass and bushes. The maintenance crew had always kept the landscaping immaculate. I passed the playground and the basketball court, where I'd spend my childhood from sunup to sundown with friends. I parked out back, grabbed a walkie, giving my wife the other. "I'll radio you as soon as I get in. Be alert and be ready." I opened the gate to the common walkway. His condo was the third one down. With my rifle in my right hand, I reached for my keys with the left hand. Out of habit, I guess. They weren't there. I'd left them behind at home, hanging in the kitchen. I hadn't had much use for them in the past 28 days. I slowly approached his back door. It was locked. I rang the doorbell and knocked, waited, hoping and praying for an answer. Nothing, not a peep. I went to check the garage door to see if his car was in there. It was locked too. I decided to kick it in. The garage was empty. His car wasn't there. If he wasn't home, there was only one other place he could be. The golf course where he was a member at. He played every day. Usually post over 130 rounds a year. It wasn't uncommon for him to play 36 holes and then go enjoy some drinks at the outdoor bar. I decided to leave a note on the back door, telling him we were okay, his granddaughters were fine, and we were headed to Wood Creek campsite in the southern tier. Before I could turn around, I heard gunshots ring out, all too close. My first thought was the wife and kids in the Bronco. I picked up the walkie, called out, and received no response. I ran back out to the vehicle. They were all unharmed. More shots rang out, though. I could hear them, but I couldn't tell where they were coming from. I hopped back in the driver's seat and we took off. I said, "Grandpa's not here. He's probably stranded at the golf course when the world changed." It was in the same direction we were headed. Southeast. I had no idea who was shooting and what they were shooting at, and we weren't here to find out. At that moment, a group of fighter jets flew overhead in the direction of the airport. I could hear bombs dropping and missiles being deployed. I only hoped it was our boys exterminating Russian forces occupying that airport. The golf course where he was a member at was 15 miles away, and I now had a sense of urgency come over me, knowing that's where my father was. It was mostly back roads leading into rural areas, with one bridge to cross that went over the New York State Thruway. I prayed it was still intact. We were about to find out. I pulled the Bronco off the side of the road a half-mile short of the overpass. Binoculars in hand, I saw no roadblock, no damage, no signs of trouble. We began our approach, and I was shocked at what I saw on the Thruway. Among the dozens and dozens of stranded vehicles was a huge C-5 Galaxy military transport plane that had crashed to the ground. I'd only ever seen pictures of these enormous planes that carried tanks, Humvees, and supplies. It was broken into pieces along the shoulder of the Thruway. I took a moment and took the scene in. We continued over the bridge 5 miles out from our destination. My father was ex-Air Force. He was a mechanic on the aircrafts back in the 60s. I held out hope he was still alive and well. The golf course sat adjacent to acres and acres of cornfields. There was a restaurant and a bar there as well, enough food and beverages where he could have survived these 28 days. Knowing him, he was playing golf from sunrise to sunset each day, complaining of the course conditions that weren't being kept up with. We rolled up the road, and the course was to our left. I was scanning the parking lot for his white Hyundai Sonata. "There it is," I yelled. "He's here." I could not contain my excitement for a moment, forgetting how dangerous this world still is. My wife tried to calm me down, but after a month of wondering about his fate, I was seconds from reuniting with him. There was no keeping calm. We drove in the parking lot and I could see 6 to 7 guys sitting out around the outdoor bar. They were shocked to see a vehicle rolling in. I knew a bunch of the members from the 3 to 4 times a year my dad would bring me as a guest to play golf. I told the family to wait here while I see what's going on. Taking no chances, I approached heavily armed with my rifle and sidearm. I recognized Donnie, one of my father's friends and playing partners. I said, "Donnie, where's my dad? I see his car out there in the parking lot." He didn't answer me. I asked again, this time with a more stern voice. "Don, where is he?" Again, no answer, but this time he shook his head. By now we were face to face. I grabbed him by his shirt, asked again, "Where is he?" Don pointed over to the 9th green. I could see a freshly dug grave. The 9th hole was my father's favorite. He once won a skin there for over $1,900. I dropped to my knees and tears ran down my cheeks. I was devastated. It was 3 days away from his birthday. I asked Donnie how, what happened. By now the rest of the guys sitting there began to extend their condolences. "How, Donnie? Tell me, damn it." Donnie said that originally there was about 25 guys there left after the grid went down. Each day a few would wander off looking for help, looking for water. He said 2 weeks after everything went to shit, they ran out of water and resorted to collecting rainwater and drinking from the 3 ponds on the course. What they didn't run out of, though, was alcohol. Most days, after golfing, a group of 10 to 12 guys sat around drinking and playing cards. 5 days ago, there was a disagreement between Bill and Charlie. Words were exchanged and it became physical. Your dad tried to separate them, but Charlie shoved him. Your dad fell over and hit his head on the concrete. He immediately began convulsing. There was blood coming out of his eyes and ears. We knew his skull was fractured, but we couldn't do anything. We had no help, no ambulance, no 911, nothing. He died later that night, and I decided to bury him on his favorite hole. I said, "Where's Charlie now, Don? Where is he?" Don said it was an accident. He didn't mean for it to happen. Things got heated from the alcohol. I don't care. Where is he, Don? The rest of the men tried to calm me. I raised my rifle in their direction and said, "I'm only going to ask one more time. Where the fuck is he?" One of the other guys squealed, said he's out on the 6th hole collecting water. I radioed my wife, said, "Hold tight, don't let your guard down." She asked, "What's wrong? Is he okay?" I couldn't muster the words or the courage to tell her. "Stay put, and I'll be back as soon as possible." You see, he wasn't just my dad. He was a best friend, a role model, the person I looked to for guidance and wisdom. I just kept replaying what I imagined his last few hours on Earth were spent like. Unable to talk, unable to see, most likely in a vegetative state. I was hell-bent on revenge. The group pleaded with me not to go after Charlie. It went in one ear and right out the other. I set off on a mile or so walk to the 6th hole to find and kill Charlie.